and welcome back. We've been gone for a minute, but today we're going to make a favorite of my daughter and my husband, and that is Southern style salmon croquettes. In fact, I've actually done a high school cooking class on the same recipe. Before we get started though, I need you to hit that like and subscribe button and share with your friends and family. So salmon croquettes is a quick meal and it's very reasonably priced. But I'm going to use cans of mackerel, 1 can of mackerel, one can of salmon, some breadcrumbs. This is Worcestershire sauce and lemon juice. This is sautéed green onions and onions, 2 eggs, and then my seasoning mixture, which will be in the recipe down below, and then cornmeal. So before we get started, this is a part that always starts with love, and that is getting all the bones out of the salmon croquettes, the mackerel. So we're going to open a can, pour our excess fluid. And what I always do, I use one big pan. And this is the easy part. You're going to get a small fork like this. And you're going to open it up gently. And then you're just going to open and scrape all those little fine bones down here. Now, I come from a family of 8. I have 5 sisters and my dad and mom, right? So we knew when she was making salmon croquettes, she was doing this with love. Because, of course, she had to open a bunch of cans and do a lot of scraping. Because she did not want her babies, anybody to get one of these bones. Now, you may go to other places and they just scrape the bones up because they, like, the bones are real fine. It's just like sardines. Some people eat the whole sardine. But for me, it's a psychological thing. I know the bone in there. I don't want it. So you can do this. A lot of people just crush them up. But for me, I like to do it this way. This is how my mom's always done it. And this is how I learned to do it. And you just take your fork and just scrape them. I will tell you, as prices have gotten higher and people start realizing about these salmon croquettes, and you can use mackerel to make them, mackerel went up. So I want to go make sure I get all those bones out. And yes, people say you need to have gloves when you do this. That's fine. I always keep washing my hands and drying them. So this is now, I'm using 1 can of salmon. And one reason I use the salmon and the mackerel mixture is because the salmon is oftentimes drier. So we're going to do the salmon same way. Open up. And we're going to go through there and get those little bones. See, that crumbles right in your hand. And then we're going to do this one. Salmon usually has a little bit less bones when they get it out the can. Can you make these from fresh salmon? Probably, yeah. Most likely you can. Just like it'd be like a salmon burger. But when you're on a budget, this is the best way for me. So we're going to just go ahead and break that apart like that. I've gotten all the bones in my little jar here. Okay, we're back. My producer / daughter had to go to work, so this is my first time trying to record without her help. So we're going to take it easy and breezy. So you remember all the ingredients we had before. Now we're going to mix them up. Remember, I have gotten that salmon and mackerel, and I got rid of the bones. So all I'm going to do is going to break this up. I'm using a fork for this for a very specific reason. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a hole right there in the middle. Okay? I'm going to beat my 2 eggs. Pour those in the middle. And remember, I sauteed some onions and bell pepper, onions and green onions. We're going to mix that right in there. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take our lemon juice and Worcestershire mixture. We're going to pour that in there. And what I do have a little extra Worcestershire sauce here, just in case we need extra. Okay? And now we're just going to mix that all in. And now if you're one of the type of people who don't want to taste your seasonings before, you can always wait on the egg and mix everything up and see your seasonings and then add them, just to make sure you don't have your salt content, because you don't want to taste it after you put the raw eggs in. Go ahead and mix that up. Add a little more seasoning. And you want to season high so it go everywhere. Okay, I used about half of that seasoning, see? What I have left. Okay? Now, if you're coming back on salt, cut back the salt content. Now I'm going to take a little bit of seasoning here, and I'm going to mix it right in my cornmeal. We'll come back to that later. Now, you see the consistency? That is too moist. Now, what I've done here is I have some breadcrumbs, some plain breadcrumbs, and a little cornmeal. And I'm going to put some of that in forkfuls, just so I can get it to being filling. I want it to be able, I'm making a croquette as a patty. So we don't want it too moist, because we want it to be able to stay together when we fry it. I'm using my fork and not my hand, because I want it to be light. And when you start using your hand on raw meats like that, sometimes you can make it dense and compact it too much. So I'm not going to get my hand in there until after I've got ready to make my patties. See how thicker it is now with the cornmeal and breadcrumbs? I'm going to add a little bit more. Forkfuls. I don't want it too dry. If it ever gets too dry for you, always add a little more Worcestershire sauce to it. See, now it's starting to clump together, right? Now we're going to add a little bit more. I'm still using my fork. And remember, with salmon, and canned salmon can be a little dry. And the mackerel has a good fat content, because salmon technically doesn't have a lot as much fat. So now, look at that. See that consistency? Put my glove on here. And one thing about when you use sauteed onions and green onions, I sauteed it in butter. Not olive oil, butter. So that way, it keeps the fat content. Now, that is, if you get ready to make, how you know if you have the right consistency? You get ready, you grab a handful, and you try to make a patty. Right? Because you want it to be moist. Now, to me, well, you can see there's cracks in there. Get that close up so you can see. I don't think that's going to stick together. Right? And you can feel it. You can hear the moisture. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add a little bit more. All right. Mixing it in good. And I use plain breadcrumbs and cornmeal. That's what's make them southern size salmon croquettes. Yes, I know I use mackerels, but you know what? That's what I grew up on. We was a big family, and we weren't doing canned salmon like that. So now we're going to mix our cornmeal with the seasoning I sprinkled through there. And now I'm going to show you how we're going to make these patties. So what I have is a parchment sheet of paper here on top of a cookie sheet. And what we're going to do is make sure that we keep these in the refrigerator a little bit before we fry them. But we're going to fry these. That's how you got to make them. You can bake them in the oven. I know people, into that baking oven, but I'm old school. So we're going to grab a handful, like this much. That's a fist, right? And when you're looking at about meat portions, that is, you want your meat portion to be about that size. When you match it out, that is about 6 to 8 ounces of meat, and that's about 1 serving size for our adult. We're going to make it into patties like that, and we're just going to dip it into our cornmeal mixture, and then we're going to toss it to get the excess cornmeal off. See? There you go. Because when you make these, you're not going to be mashing them down when you fry them. You want them to be light. It's not like a crab cake. You know, crab cake, oftentimes you use mayonnaise and to make the patty. Here's another one. See? Palm full. Then I take it in my palm and mash it down. Go around the edges. And the reason it's important that we make these about the same is because we want them all to fry about the same. If they're all the same sizes, they fry the same. So that way you can only turn once or twice versus keep turning individual ones. Okay, so I'm done making the patties. And you see how they look. I made about 7 of them total. See? So now I'm going to put these in the refrigerator because now I'm going to make some cornbread to go with these. Okay, y'all, I'm back. I'm still by myself. My producer slash daughter is going to work, so I'm trying to finish up my salmon croquettes by myself with no help. So we're going to get in here and fry them. The oil is hot. See, about 1.5 inches of oil, and I'm going to test it to make sure it's hot. You don't want it too hot. And you see that cornmeal floats up. That means it's the right temperature. I started my heat on medium. Now all we're going to do is take those ones we put in that refrigerator, let sit for a minute, drop them in. I always put my stuff when I'm frying in a circle so I can remember how I put them in so I can turn them in that same order. So remember, we're going to make this made about 7. Nice size. I made a baby one for me, of course. And you don't want to overcrowd when you're frying. So put this little tube back so they'll be frying by themselves. So you see how they're frying, right? We're going to wait until they get golden brown on the bottom before we turn them. And then once we turn them, we're going to show you how to get them all so they won't get too oily. Got my macaroni and cheese going in the back. And now see how they're getting nice and brown? You don't want to turn before they're too brown at the bottom. Now, I'm going to grab my fork here. I don't want to splash on me. You know how that goes. If you ain't been burned by them good popping grease, you ain't been in the kitchen long enough. You know. And then like they say, hot as fish grease, that's what they mean. So I nice turn them with the little fork and the spatula. Nice and easy. See how pretty brown they are? This one. Slide. And then this one. Yeah. See how they stayed together? They weren't too moist. Remember how we made sure they weren't too moist. Now you're only going to fry them about 2 to 3 minutes on each side, based on how deep they are, how thick they are, and how big they are. You do not ever take your spatula and press down on them. That's a no-no. You want to let them float. Just let them do what they do, right? So you're going to move them around, and once the other side gets golden brown, we're going to take them out. And then we're going to fry our last 2. And then I'm going to show you how we're going to serve these with the good mac and cheese and potato salad. Yes, it's double starch. The mac and cheese is for me. Potato salad for my husband. I got homemade cornbread in the oven, bacon. And once these get ready to come out, I will show you how it all looks. Okay, see how nice and brown they are? I turned them a little bit one more time while I was on a break. And now they are ready to come out. So what I'm going to do, and I know back in the day you grew up seeing your mama fry fish and chicken and put it on that paper towel or newspaper. But this is a good trick to do. And yes, if you have kids, they'll be like, "Ooh, one more dish," but I guarantee you it's worth it. You're going to take this croquette out, and you're going to put it, all I lined was a cookie cooling sheet or a wire rack on top of a cookie sheet. And that allows, when the oil is dripping off, the excess oil, you're not sitting in it. So why put on a paper towel when it absorbs it? That's what paper towel is supposed to do. Absorb liquids. So if you're going to absorb liquids, it's going to absorb the oil. So that's why you put on a wire rack to let it drip on down. So now we're going to take our last 2 croquettes, the baby ones for me. And we're just going to place those in there. And we're going to do them, give them the same attention. The cornbread's almost done. I'll show you how that looks when it comes out. You'll be able to follow my other recipe for cornbread. Other side, sweet cornbread with honey and honey butter in my next video. But right now, we're going to finish this up with some mac and cheese. I showed you the homemade potato salad, salmon croquettes, and now we're going to get done with that cornbread.